The ICG is a community of independent market researchers who collaborate, share knowledge and experience to deliver value to fellow members and to clients. If you're an independent researcher and want to connect with over 400 like-minded people, gain access to our knowledge base, get inspiration, support and advice from other members, then why don't you join us? Either visit our website, theicg.co.uk/join, or email us at membership@theicg.co.uk. If you're a client company and want to connect with the largest resource of expert independent researchers in the world, with proven expertise across all markets, categories and techniques, then why don't you contact us? Either visit our website, theicg.co.uk/connect, or email us, connect@theicg.co.uk. If you're a supplier and want to promote yourself to over 400 buyers of research services, then why don't you contact us? Either visit our website, theicg.co.uk/advertise, or email us at admin@theicg.co.uk. The ICG, Expert Independent Researchers.
Now, this webinar is kindly sponsored by Indemo, a simple-to-use mobile call platform that blends mobile video and private social networking to help you capture spontaneous, real-life moments that give you a deeper understanding of respondent behavior. Indemo is ideal for customer journey, pre-tasking, or mobile ethnography type projects. The app feels a little bit like Instagram with a task list. Researchers assign tasks and respondents respond to those tasks by posting in the moment photos, videos, and notes. Using push notifications, moderators can interact with respondents and probe responses in real time. If you've ever struggled with collating homework tasks or transferring video files, Indemo will save you a lot of time and heartache. For moderators, think of the Indemo dashboard as a hybrid of Pinterest, Facebook, and Dropbox. It looks like Pinterest, is interactive like Facebook, and stores all your photos and videos like Dropbox. The dashboard is intuitive, visual, and simple to use, and it is very powerful at bringing your research to life in a really rich and visual way. And Indemo is offering a 30% discount to any ICG members on their first project, and you can contact them at info@indemo.com.
Thank you, Arthur. Good morning, everybody, again. We're looking forward to talking to you over the next 40 minutes or so, and I'm looking forward to hearing and answering your questions towards the end of the hour. So, Arthur, thank you for introducing Jane and me. There's a picture of Jane and also one of me, just so you know who you're talking to. What are we going to cover in the next 40 minutes or so? I will take you through what is customer journey mapping, and we're going to sort of go straight in with some examples of how to do it and what it looks like in different formats. In the how section, Jane is going to take over for the middle bit and talk to you about how we use insight in our customer journey mapping projects. And then we'll talk to you about the why. Why would you bother with customer journey mapping, where we can talk about some of the challenges and some of the benefits. And then towards the end, we're going to look a little bit further forward and talk about how we can use customer journey mapping to improve our customer experiences, and how we can use customer journey mapping to redesign experiences. So that's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to go straight in to an example of a type of customer journey mapping. Here is what we call a simple mapping technique, and I will talk to you about how this works. This is called sometimes called a heat map or a heartbeat map, and you will see why in a moment. So I'm sure some of you have done customer journey mapping in the past, and you may have used techniques similar to this. What this is a grid, and along the top, as I will show you at the moment, are some steps in the customer journey. For this particular example, we've chosen a working mother who's called Susan. She's 32 years old. She lives in Crewe, and she is going to be going on her weekly supermarket shop with her toddler in the buggy. So those of you who've done that, you know what it's like. Susan yet hasn't discovered the joys of online shopping, so she still has to jump in the car and sort of the supermarket. So what we do first, and I think this applies to sort of any type of journey map, once you've actually worked out what it is you're going to map, and this is quite a short journey, it's a shopping trip, and you've worked out who the map is for, is you need to define what your stages or your steps in the journey are. And I've just populated those for you. So the key stages for Susan are: she's going to park her car, she's going to get the trolley, she's going to go and do her shopping, she's going to check out and pay, put all the gear in the car, and put the trolley back, and she's going to drive home. So that's quite a short slice of Susan's experience today. But sometimes we will use customer journey mapping to map a whole life cycle, where we'll have sort of stages that might be called awareness, interest, deciding, buying, receiving, using, problem solving, that sort of thing. But here it's just a simple exercise to get you sort of thinking and in the mood. So what we're going to do is just build Susan's supermarket journey over the next few slides. We've got the stages along the top. It's really important to have those stages, and don't have too many, otherwise you'll find yourself with something that's too big to fit on the page, too big to fit on the screen, too big for people to understand. So what we're going to do is just go through, and you can see a blue line that will have appeared in front of you, and this blue line represents how Susan is feeling, really. Is she experiencing a positive or negative feeling as she moves through her journey? And obviously the middle line there is sort of average, and anything above it is good, and anything below it is not so good. I'm not going to go through this in great detail because we don't have time, but Jane will talk to you a little bit more about the insight that we might use to actually plot the curve on the grid. I mean, how do we know how Susan's feeling? Well, you know, we might go with her and ask her, or we might do it through some other research methodologies. But let's assume that we've found out somehow or other. She's used this supermarket before, so she knows where to park the car. They've got parent and child wide parking spaces which are near the door, so all goes very smoothly. It's a trolley where she doesn't need €1 or a pound coin to release it, so that's great so far. When she goes actually into the store, she finds that there's some stock issues. She hasn't got all the things that she needs, so she has to sort of find alternatives. That's a real nuisance for Susan because she's in a bit of a rush and she's got a fractious toddler in the trolley. It gets a little bit worse because when she actually finally fills up her trolley, she goes to the checkout. We've all been there. There's a long queue. You think that the queue next to you is going to be moving a little bit faster. So you can see immediately how Susan's mood is starting to drop. If we were measuring her sort of anxiety or stress levels, obviously the curve would be the other way around. We'd sort of be seeing that, you know, she's getting stressed and impatient and so on. It does get a little bit better once she finally gets to the front of the queue. The person who's checking her scanning her items and stuff is a very understanding person, knows what it's like, manages to calm her down, distracts the child in the trolley, and it gets a little bit better, above the average there. Eventually she pays. She's got one of these wonky trolleys, so that's a nuisance. It's a bit heavy, but once she's finally unloaded her shopping into the back of the car, the trolley person sort of says, well, excuse me, madam, I'll take that for you. I'll put it back in the trolley park. So that's you can see now why that's called a heartbeat map, and it's quite easy to plot. And what it does is it sort of forces you to think about what the issues are, and if I fill in the bottom. And what I really like about this simple format is that even with a sort of simple map, not much data, the supermarket here, or whatever other business it is that's doing the mapping, can identify quite quickly some issues and opportunities for improvement. So, if they promise that they've got fresh chilies, then they need to be sure that they've got fresh chilies available. This would be the same on an online shopping experience as well. Sometimes we do go shopping online and find that the things that we're promised aren't available. It's particularly annoying with sort of multi-buy offers when you get delivered what you weren't expecting and you find that your discounts haven't been applied. So this is a supermarket that needs to make sure that it's got all the stock available. The checkout, they could possibly introduce more self-scanning machines. Some people love them, some people hate them. They need to work out whether they've got the right staffing levels. They need to have a system in place to make sure that when the queues do build up, they ring the bell and people come out and man the tills. Some supermarkets are better than that than others. the key thing here, the staff empathy. They've got a person working on the checkout who is very, very experienced, can engage with the customer, can engage even with the little toddler sitting in the back of the trolley, and sort of exchange pleasantries. I think staff empathy, we know from our customer experience work that empathy is a key pillar of great experiences, and if you can create that sort of engagement with your customers, they're more likely to come back. And then a very functional improvement opportunity that they do need to address is to make sure that they've got the great trolleys that they promise. I went into a wine warehouse just the other day, and they'd replaced all the trolleys. The ones that they have outside had been getting rather wonky, and the last time I went in, all the trolleys were new, lovely smooth wheels, and actually I remarked to the person working there that they got new trolleys, and he was, you could see actually that he was pleased that they were new trolleys as well, because it makes life easier for him, his colleagues, and for their customers. So a simple map that just sort of enables you to work out some issues, some hotspots as we call them. So if I go back to the top of the map under the Go to Checkout column, we've put a heart there for a hotspot, because that's where the experience is worse for Susan. So this is the key part of the experience that this supermarket would want to address if they were seeking to make Susan's experience better. You can't always improve everything all at once. There isn't the funding, there isn't the appetite. But here, the checkout experience, I think, as we all know, is a key hotspot. Sometimes we call them moments of truth. And they are those moments in the journey that really make or break the experience, and will actually over time generate loyalty or disloyalty if you don't get them right or wrong. So a simple mapping technique that I think anybody, if they print out this grid, can try in the office. They can try it with their own business. They can try it on a client's business. Pick a part of the experience that you know a little bit about based on your own knowledge, and just go through and see what issues and opportunities you yourselves find in the bottom row. I think you'll be surprised once you apply a sort of rigorous approach to this, what you can discover that you didn't know about before. So that's our simple heartbeat map. And a few top tips if you were doing something like this with a group of colleagues or from yourselves. These are 6 top tips that we always would apply to customer journey mapping. First of all, make sure that it's always from the customer perspective. A lot of businesses fall into the trap of thinking inside out rather than outside in. You have to try and force yourselves to say, what is it really like for the customer? Don't worry about your internal processes and try and force the customer to fit with those, but always do it from that outside in view. It's often a good idea to have one map for different customer segments. Those of you who are familiar with segments, which I'm sure many of you are, because their needs will be different, the way that they want to interact with you will be different. Think about sort of younger people who skip channels seamlessly. I was at a conference yesterday, and it was some research that concluded that Generation Z were born seamless. They can easily skip between channels. So it might be wise for some types of businesses to have different maps for different channels, or you might be able to, with some color coding and iconography, sort of identify which different channels apply for which different parts of the journey. Particularly important in retail, I think, where so many of us sort of do our research online but like to go in store, or actually the other way around. We might go into a store, get some advice from a specialist, and then go home and buy it somewhere else where it's cheaper. So I think we're all experienced with doing that. Separate maps for different things. You wouldn't want to do, I think an insurance business is a good example. Taking out home or contents insurance is one part of a journey. If you're unfortunate enough to have to make an insurance claim, then that's such a sort of critical part of the journey that you wouldn't want to try and map the whole life cycle of insurance with the full experience of making a claim in that map as well. You need a separate map for the claim journey, or particularly as well with complaints or raising concerns. That's often an important part of a business's customer journey that they want to map separately and make sure they get right. Going back to Susan's map, we saw that we had about sort of 6-7 stages on her map. As I said, you don't want too many stages because it just gets too complicated. You need to sort of try and combine stages sometimes where you can. And you need to identify those stages first, put the heartbeat monitor in afterwards, and quite quickly you will derive some improvement opportunities, as we said. Now, that's one sort of simple map format that we can use. What other types of map formats do we know about? Most people, when they start journey mapping, do it like this. They get together in a room with some big rolls of paper, lots of different coloured post-it pads, lots of different coloured pens, and they will sketch out a simple map structure with stages. This has got sort of swim lanes which might represent different channels or different products. You can't read it, nor can I, but it's not unlike Susan's supermarket map, really. The stages are on the top. You can even see that they've got a heartbeat type curve towards the bottom, and the blue section at the very bottom of there would be the improvement opportunities. So most people start like this with a workshop activity and end up with lots of post-its on lots of flip chart paper stuck on the wall. That will take you so far, but you can't really take this around with you. You can't share it digitally. You can't take it into the boardroom, because if you try and roll it up, it will fall apart. So quite quickly, you need to capture this output into some sort of format that is much more portable. It's not difficult to do that, and I'll come to those in a moment, but if you are doing a customer journey map on a sort of flip chart post-it format, then here are some top tips for journey mapping workshops. You're going to have lots of people in the room doing the activity on the right. Beforehand, I think it's very important, and we'll come to sort of some of the sort of more strategic issues around journey mapping a little bit later on, but it's very important that you have a clear scope and business objective. Why are we doing this customer journey map? What is the itch that we're trying to scratch? Are we trying to attract more customers? Are we trying to get existing customers to spend more and stay longer? Are we trying to iron out cost? Are we trying to just improve time and effort? Are we trying to make the thing more pleasant? It's really important to have an objective which you might sort of want to put down in 1 or 2 simple sentences so that people understand why they're there, not just mapping for mapping's sake. It's good to have the right people. Now, what do I mean by the right people? Typically, you want a mix of functions doing customer journey mapping. If you just put operations together, and I've seen this happen, you'll just get a sort of inside-out view which will validate the way that we operate today. So you need people on the front line who know what it's like to talk to customers day in, day out in the call center, in the store, like that. You need some managers who are responsible for performance and target setting, perhaps. It's good to have people from marketing in there, because there's often a disconnect between marketing messages and the actual experience that we deliver. It's good if you can persuade them to get people from finance there, because people from finance don't often engage with customers, and if you sort of lift the veils from their eyes, they can see that things aren't right, and it's good to have finance on your side early on, because at the end of the day they're going to have to sign the check for some of the things that you want to change. Get HR in there as well, because so much of the customer experience that we deliver is delivered by people, and they may need some training, some learning and development. So a broad representative sample. Don't get too many senior people. Get some people who actually know what it's like, and get some people who are enthusiastic, who can talk enthusiastically about the project when they go back to where they work, and you'll quite quickly start to create a bit of a buzz. You need a venue. I would often say do it off-site. Have a room that is big enough, lots of wall space to stick stuff on, some natural light that's light and airy so people sort of don't lose energy halfway through the day. You need sort of typical materials, post-its, pens, paper, blue tack, and so on. You might need someone to facilitate it, and and it's often a good idea to get someone sort of independent to facilitate it. You sort of need a blend of youth and experience there, and you'll need some sort of, before you go, some sort of input from the insight that Jane will talk to us about a little bit later. On the day itself, you can sort of have an intro session, set out what we're going to do. This is the methodology. If you've got a lot to do, you can split up into small groups and have different groups working on 2 or 3 different stages. The next thing, I think, is it's really good to just take lots of photos. We can all do that with our smartphones. You can sort of volunteer everybody to take the odd photo, or actually get someone with a nice camera, because the quality is eventually going to be better. And take loads of photos, not just of people like in this cartoon there sticking stuff up, but actually I really like it when, and I've done this, get some close-ups of what people are writing, get some close-ups of people sort of huddling together over a table, get people, close-ups of people writing down ideas, and then when you start to build your story in the organisation, it will be part of the assets that you're building and sharing and getting people excited about. Quite quickly, as we saw from Susan's example, you'll get some quick wins. In any project, it's great to build confidence through quick wins, so some of those will be easy to do, but you might not have thought of them before you did this. Capture those and try and get some support and budget for those, because at the end of the day that will pay off. And it's really important to sort of circulate your output, share it, get people to come and look at it. If you're lucky enough to have a room on site where you can stick your work up, then get people to come in and share their ideas. Give them a post-it pad and a pen. Say, what do you think? What would you change? What would you add? Is this right? How can we improve it? And the map sort of starts to become a bit of a living thing rather than just an asset that's stale and static. So there's your workshop. You've got some formats, you've got some output, you've got some excitement. How are you going to share and capture this? I would say, here's one example, and actually this is the same kind of thing as Susan's supermarket trip. This has been built in Excel, and you can do it equally well in PowerPoint. PowerPoint is sometimes a little bit more visual. This is done in Excel with someone with some good Excel skills. It's got, if you think back to Susan's map, it's got what this is about. It's about council housing benefit, and there's a segment identified. It's got some key journey steps along the top. It's gone a little bit beyond Susan's map. We've captured what the customer might be thinking or feeling as they move through this stage of the journey. Obviously, claiming housing benefit is quite a big deal for those people who need it, so there's some fairly strong emotions going on here. We've got the customer experience chart, as they call it. This is the equivalent of Susan's heartbeat monitor. How well are we doing? We've got some smiley faces to show how the customer's feeling there. And the next stage that I quite like, actually, or the next row, is could this step have been avoided? They've got a couple of stages in their journey that if they went to redesign it, and we'll talk about redesign later, they think they could probably redesign out so that the journey is so much easier and seamless. And then they've got, like we had earlier with Susan, some customer improvements that they can make quite quickly from having done their work. So Excel, PowerPoint enables you to share the map quite easily. Or if you want to sort of go beyond, you can actually bring in sort of some design skills and make what I might call a branded map, because the one before looked fairly flat. This is in the corporate brand, so it's using the color palette, brand fonts and so on, so that when you show this to the marketing director or the CEO, he or she gets excited because it looks on brand, and they're much more, they're just emotionally, they're more likely to engage with it and ask fewer questions and say that's great. But it's not that different. This is a sort of mobile phone supplier scenario in a store, but it's got cartoons, it's got stars, it's got sort of tabs along the top. This obviously requires more budget, more money, because you've got to pay a designer unless you've got a studio in-house that can do this. But eventually you might sort of say, well, we need something that's on brand because we're going to be showing it to the board or to our shareholders and so on. And it needs to just look great, which this one does. The other way that you can develop your mapping is by buying some journey mapping software. There are lots of providers of journey mapping software out there in the market these days. This one is from a company called Suite CX. It's good. There are others like Mapavate, like Touchpoint Dashboard. You can find these through a simple Google search, obviously. What the software enables you to do is actually to store your information, because it effectively works in a database, and then the software takes the information from the database and converts it into whatever format you like, the sort of grid, boxy version on the top, or the more sort of story-led flow diagram on the bottom. But it all sort of works off a database, and they all work in a similar way, which enables you to store that, share it. You can give different people who own different stages of a journey rights to modify their map, and it does mean that you can share maps more easily. And most of the providers of journey mapping software work on a sort of subscription licensee basis. So it's just you pay per user, or you might have an enterprise if you need lots of users. Typically, people when they start out with software just have 2 or 3 power users in the customer experience or marketing or insight team, and then eventually they sort of start to share it wider. With any of this, whether it's PowerPoint, software, Excel, the important thing to remember is it won't do the work for you, and the work has to be done with the team, with the workshop, with the post-its, and it won't do the thinking for you as well. So yes, it will make your life easier in terms of capturing stuff once you've become a bit of a black belt with the software or PowerPoint or whatever, but it won't take away the sort of the work. I think the good news is that the work is fun. I've never been in a customer journey mapping project or workshop where people really didn't enjoy it. I mean, and they always are very, very proud of the work they've done at the end of the day or the couple of days. So that's a fairly quick sort of whistle-stop tour through what journey mapping is, and the different formats that you can use to present it to other people. I'm now going to hand the microphone to Jane, who's going to talk to you about how we use Insight to support our customer journey mapping projects. Over to you, Jane.
Great, thanks very much, Alvin. So as Insight professionals, the key way that we contribute to developing customer journey maps is bringing an understanding of 3 things. Firstly, the customer. Secondly, how well the service is performing for the customer. And thirdly, the business context for customer experience and journey mapping. I'm now going to go on to say a little bit more on each of these 3 areas. So, key aspects of understanding the customer. Firstly, we need to know what customer segments we have. Alvin mentioned this earlier. Susan was in a particular segment. So, Insight teams really come into their own here by letting people in the business understand the customer, and we might do this with the assistance of some output like personas, which are thumbnail sketches of real or archetypal customer types. And secondly, we as Insight professionals help the organisation understand what's important to customers when they're experiencing our service. Normally this is done through some type of market research, at least qualitative research, but generally quantitative as well. We can ask people directly to tell us what the most important facets of the experience are, or we can use special statistical analyses on quantitative data to derive that information instead. So for example, at London Underground, we used focus groups to identify about 20 or so key aspects of underground travel experience, and then we used key driver analysis on quantitative customer satisfaction data to tell us what their relative importance to the customer was. So the second aspect of understanding that we bring is understanding performance. In Alvin's map of Susan at the supermarket, that was one individual's experience. Often journey maps show the aggregated experience of a customer segment using aggregated quantitative data. So often customer experience performance information is quantitative. It can be qualitative, and you might just have to go with whatever is available to you, but generally speaking it's quantitative. There's all sorts of different ways that the performance can be gauged quantitatively. Typically it's via market research surveys such as customer satisfaction, net promoter score, customer effort score, these types of work. Each has their own pros and cons, and some are more suited to certain markets and business strategies than others. And often these sorts of surveys are event driven. By that I mean they're triggered by a particular recent experience. So asking people who've just booked a flight about the booking process. They can be about the whole end-to-end journey. So for a flight, what the experience was like, right from booking all the way through to having flown. There are other sorts of quantitative information about performance that can be used, and I've listed some of those here on the screen. It's not always just surveys. And thirdly, as insight professionals, we need to understand what the internal perspective is as well as the external. And this is partly so that the mapping happens constructively, and also to make sure that we're not getting any naive suggestions arising from the journey mapping for changing the experience. So we have to understand the market that the business is working in, what the consumer trends are, the industry norms are, and if there's a regulatory environment. So if you're in a regulated industry, there might be certain things in the customer experience that have to be there, whether the customer likes it or not. We have to understand the operating model of the business, how the business makes its money, how the business works, and what's easy to change and what's not. We have to understand the stakeholders in the organisation, who's going to be the people who will make improvement decisions and deliver them, and who we need to get buy-in for or from. And we need to understand the culture in the organisation, whether this is going to be, journey mapping is going to be received with open arms, how customer focused the organisation is, how resistant to change it is, how collaborative it is, and so on. Now, the final way that insight professionals can contribute to the customer journey mapping process is that we might actually be the people who organise and run the journey mapping workshops and sort of take charge of developing that journey map and circulating it and so on. And we might also be responsible for validating draft journey maps with customers. So we might do that afterwards, or we might even arrange for customers to be included in journey mapping workshops. So I hope I've given you a flavour of how involved insight and insight professionals are or can be in supporting and possibly driving journey mapping in organisations. So I'm just going to hand back to Alvin now.
Thank you, Jane. So I think just a little sort of summary of what we've heard so far before we move ahead to sort of a slightly different section. Just a reminder, journey mapping is structured. So, you know, it talks about segments, channels, stages, touch points, using a kind of common language. So as an organisation does this, it's important that different departments do it in the same way, really, so that we can eventually bring our maps together as shown here. It's visual, whatever tool you use, whether it's paper and post-its or PowerPoint or a designer or a piece of software, it's going to be visually engaging. It's going to be something that people want to come and look at. It's based on facts. It's based on the customer perspective. So, you know, it's driven by the insight and the data that Jane has just talked to us about. So if it's based on facts, then people shouldn't be able to pull it apart too much. And it's always from the customer point of view, that outside-in view of what it's like to do business with us rather than the other way around. And that's really important. So sort of 4 key building blocks of journey mapping. But, you know, a word of warning, I sort of hinted at this earlier, but the map is no good unless you know where you want to get to. You need that sort of objective at the beginning. Otherwise, the map is just sort of, it's going to look nice, but it's not going to be an agent of change. It's not going to help the organization change. So it's really important to make sure that the business issue you're trying to address is defined, understood. There's an idea behind what we're going to do. The next bit is about why would we do journey mapping? What are the benefits of doing journey mapping? Well, as I said just now, it's sort of fact-based. It reflects that reality. It gives you that outside-in view of what it's like to do business with us today. It's engaging because the map, by its very nature, starts to tell a story, and the way that we can influence people in organizations is increasingly recognized as being through storytelling rather than through presenting tabs of numbers. It's focused, so as we saw from Susan's supermarket journey, it quite quickly identifies those hotspots or moments of truth that can make or break the customer relationship that the organization really needs to focus on. It stimulates ideas for opportunities for improvement. What are we going to change? And you know, you can start to draw out the solutions that you want to apply to that, whether it's around people, process, technology, policies, and so on. And it sets you up for success. And you don't just need to take our word for that, but some research done by the Aberdeen group last year showed that organizations that actively manage the customer journey outperform those that don't. And you know, if you want to find out what the citation for that research is, you can ask us later on. But it's quite a compelling piece of research actually that says, and obviously actively managing the customer journey is inevitably going to start with some customer journey mapping projects. So there's real commercial benefit to doing this. And you know, just as in what market research reduces risk in decision making, so customer journey mapping reduces the risk of delivering a poor experience. We don't want our experiences just to happen by accident. We want to design them carefully. Today's consumers are very unforgiving, will readily go somewhere else if they can't get what they need. So it's really important to make sure that you understand how well you deliver on the expectations that are set by your brand, your creative, your advertising, and so on. So some key principles for success, and this goes sort of to customer experience projects as well as just customer journey mapping narrowly defined. 3 sort of key strands to this. Strategically, it's really important that you do have senior sponsorship. So going back to that idea of having a business objective, what is it we're trying to achieve? You need to get the senior team to be behind that. Otherwise, most change initiatives don't work. They're not successful because they haven't got the senior backing they need. It needs to align with the business strategy. You know, are we a price or product or a service-led business? Make sure that what we're designing through our mapping projects fits and supports our business strategy for growth or acquisition or whatever it may be. Tactically, it's important to sort of have one agreed version of how we're going to do mapping. So you know, so that different teams can do different things and bring them all together, particularly if you're going to use the software, then you can sort of use that quite smartly to make sure that there's just one agreed version of how we're going to do this. I've worked with so many organizations where people in different departments are doing so-called customer initiatives with pet projects, and there's no commonality, there's no common language. Journey mapping helps you to achieve that. You're going to be using this blend of external and internal insights, as Jane just explained to us. And it's really important to have that collaborative involvement. Remember, I talked to you about what sort of people you wanted in the room for your workshops. Cross-functional, starts to break down silo mentalities, starts to get businesses thinking about the customer rather than about a narrow view of what I come to work for. And then the outcomes that you need to think about, the map starts to become the key framework through which you view the customer, view the business, make change, and any sort of change projects you could probably be able to pin on the map and say, well, this project that we're doing in IT or learning and development is going to make a positive contribution to this part of our experience as shown on the map. So the map becomes your focus for ongoing improvement. So key sort of 3 pillars of success that you, if you like, that I think it's important to get in place early on. Now that's sort of covered the first 3 stages of our presentation today, the sort of the what, the how, and why would we do it, and some things to think about as you're setting yourself up for success. We're going to sort of start to conclude with how you might use journey mapping to design your customer experiences. You've worked out some things that need improving, so what are we going to do about it? Experience redesign. The journey map that you've done is going to prompt some interesting questions like, is this bit of the journey necessary? Could we redesign it out so that it's faster, easier, less likely to go wrong? Going back to that Excel version of the housing benefit. Could we use a different channel? Could we sort of push more people to web chat rather than expensive voice call centers? How could it look and feel and be different? And as consumers, the way that we feel about something is really important. We always want to leave our customers with a positive memory of how it was to deal with us, because that's what we're going to remember as human beings. So creating positive memories, what can we do to our journey to make it more memorable and feel better? And how can we stand out from the crowd? And the image on the left, actually we ran this exercise in a conference yesterday. The image on the left she looks a bit like Taylor Swift, but I don't know what Taylor Swift is doing there, but she's holding a whole bunch of red balloons. I'm sure many of you have gone on a flight and turned up at an unfamiliar airport, and you've booked a taxi, and you exit the arrivals lounge, and you look at a sea of faces with badly written A4 pads, and amongst those is one pad with your name on it, probably spelt wrong, and you sort of try not to look weird as you peer at these strangers looking for your name. We did it yesterday as a sort of bit of fun, but we've done it for real in a business in South Africa, and said all our taxi drivers will just be holding a big red balloon. It won't be quite a big bunch like this. And you can find your taxi driver so much easier if you know that he or she will just be standing out in the crowd there holding up a big red balloon. They don't even need to know your name, because they don't need to write your name down, because we are the big red balloon taxi company. That's an example of how you can sort of just use your map to stimulate creative ideas with the red balloon. Some examples that you might sort of ask yourself as you go through. Why is it that car service centres are only open when you're at work? So we did this with a car dealership in the United States, where people drive probably a lot more than they do here. And we sort of said, well, why don't you open 24/7? And why don't you say to your customers, we'll pick up your car when you get home from work, we'll service it overnight, and we'll have it back in your drive before you head off again for work in the morning. Brilliant. Why don't we think like that? Why do we have to queue to check in at a hotel or to collect your hire car? Now, they sort of promise seamless and ease, but we still have to sort of fill in those silly paper forms at a hotel and sign it at the bottom. That could all be done in advance, and some hotels obviously do that for us. I had an experience this morning which Jane and Arthur said I should share with you. So just as I was composing myself for this webinar, I got a parking ticket on my car outside my own house in my residence parking bay, which is slightly annoying. So the parking attendant was actually very polite and explained what had happened. So my parking permit expired at the end of September, and I haven't renewed it. So I phoned the council, and they said, oh, we sent you an email, Mr. Jackson, on the 23rd of August, reminding you to renew it. And I'm now thinking, is one reminder by email sort of that far away from the renewal date enough? Have they really thought, if they'd thought about my experience as a customer of parking permits with this council and mapped my journey, they'd have probably quite quickly worked out that just one email reminder that they don't track, that I may not have seen because I get hundreds of emails every day, is not sufficient to prompt me to renew my parking permit. And they would have seen that through customer journey mapping, I think. So they need to improve, and I probably will tell them that when I speak to them next. Some experience design principles. You're going to start with the customer. Again, you may have in your business some principles about your customer experience around ease, around personalization, around sort of familiarity, excitement. Use those to start to redesign your experience. But typically, staff, colleagues, people who work need to be told what to do. You know, otherwise it's a bit of a free-for-all. And some of the best businesses that deliver great experiences actually design it very, very carefully. I think of Disney, who sort of create magical experiences, but actually it's the work that makes the magic. They don't do it by accident. And you may have something like a behavioral framework on how to engage with customers. And it's really important to measure and monitor. Once you've changed something, you need to measure and monitor that change to see whether it's having an effect. A test and learn environment. Here's an example of a redesigned experience. And this is from the railway industry. And this is, if you imagine the scene, first-class railway customers, and what we want this railway company to do is to make sure that outside every door on the first-class carriages is a conductor, a customer host, and whatever we might call them. Here they're called customer hosts, that actually greets that person as they come on. Good morning, sir. Good morning, madam. Welcome to ABC Railway. Hope you enjoy. Where are you travelling to today? This is about empathy and engagement. So this is a touchpoint design template, and you can see that it relates quite quickly back to what we've done for the map. So the customer group or segment, first-class ticket holders. Which journey stage is it about? Well, it's called on board. What's the touchpoint name? Who owns the touchpoint? The actual delivery of it. It's the customer host. You might have an importance rating, you know, and this is quite a high importance. A short description of what it is, and then what we've used here is this organisation has pillars, which are like customer principles, two that apply here. Personalisation, because you might ask this customer where they're going, makes them feel appreciated and valued. After all, they're paying a lot of money to travel first class. And we can demonstrate some empathy on board by sort of exchanging, you know, commonalities or helping them with their luggage if they've got it. What was new for this business was the box on the bottom left particularly, which is about the customer context. As I said, the redesign principles there about start with the customer. If you explain to staff why they should be doing this, what is it that customers will get out of it, what do we want customers to think, feel and say at the end of it, then the staff are much more likely to say, I get it now, I can see why I should be doing this. So be very explicit about what the customer's trying to get, and people will deliver against it. So on the right hand side, some clear instructions about what to do, because then you can measure it. If you tell people exactly what to do, then it's perfectly reasonable to go around and have sort of quality assessors saying, well, are the staff standing by the doors when the train leaves the carriage, leaves the station? Some ideal behaviours from the behavioural framework, a warm and genuine welcome with a smile, build rapport, customer eyes on rather than sort of looking down. How often have we gone into a hotel and the check-in staff are sort of looking down at their screens rather than looking up to the customers who are coming through the door and having a welcoming look on their face? It's about design, it's about training, it's about sort of consistency of purpose, and then some do's and don'ts, which actually we translated into top tips because it sounds a bit softer. That was done in PowerPoint, and then we turned it into some booklets for the staff, sort of pocket-sized booklets, for the different bits of the experience that we expect them to deliver, and they've got this in a nice branded wallet, so they know what to do. There's kind of no excuse, because this is still a sort of a bit of a sort of tell type organisation culturally, so people do need to be told what to do, otherwise they'll sort of back off and revert to their old behaviours. So we turned it into some nice booklets which people loved, felt that we were making a bit of a fuss of them. We accompanied it with some training, so that they knew exactly what they had to do and why they were doing it. So you can see, as we've gone through, we've sort of done the map, we've got our insight, we've identified some improvements, we've redesigned bits of the experience, we've turned that into some real tangible documents that people can sort of hold and support them with the right tools and techniques. and it's working very well. So we're just going to sort of start to sum up now, if I may. Some things to remember. And I think I've said all this before, but I'll say it again. The mapping is only a tool. You do need a clear strategy and objective. You need to know where you're going, and the map will help you get there. It's really important to get that senior people engaged and get that top-down support. Otherwise, change will not be successful. Start with things that are quite simple, things that people will understand. As you get more adept and experienced, you can start to map additional things, introduce some complexity, start to map not just the current but the ideal, the future journey. Work with enthusiastic, motivated people who are going to speak up, who are going to challenge, ask questions, come up with ideas. Look for those quick wins to create the momentum, the confidence, and then communicate, share, create a buzz, and people will sort of say, well, I'd like to hear more about that, I'd like to get involved. And if you do want to yourselves find out a little bit more, my colleague at Spectrum CX has just published this book. It's available at Amazon and all other good booksellers, the Customer Experience book, and it talks quite a lot about journey mapping, experience design, insight, and a lot of the sort of business and strategic and cultural challenges of customer experience strategy. So if you want to find out a little bit more about customer experience after what you've heard today, then the book would be a good place to go. So I think what I'll say now is print out the template of Susan's supermarket journey and get started on your own. And I hope you enjoy it. I'm sure you will. And I'm now going to pop up this slide, but I'm going to hand the microphone back to Arthur.
Thank you indeed for that. And yeah, I mean, you packed a lot in a very short space of time, and I know that you guys run the MRS's customer experience training course, and this was going to be just part of it, but you packed a hell of a lot in. I've got some questions for you, so let's start with these and run through them. The first one is from Viv Harrison, who's actually not listening. She emailed me with a question for you. And I think it's a question that many clients and indeed researchers are interested in finding the answer to. She says, are there any good case studies which can help with internal agreement to fund CJM type work? For example, what types of benefits and positive knock-on impacts have people seen achieved via well-executed CJM work? While it's impossible to predict exactly what will emerge for your own company until you do this sort of work, I'm looking for examples of where client companies can point to CJM insights that have influenced worthwhile actions being taken. You've just given a very good example there of the rail industry. We've only got a short amount of time left, but is there anything that you have that we could perhaps share with Viv and people like Viv?
That's a very good question from Viv. I mean, I suppose, you know, the business case for doing this, I mean, I just sort of quoted that research from the Aberdeen Group, and there's research from the likes of KPMG Nunwood, where I used to work, who publish their sort of top 100 customer experience stars in 3 markets every year. The UK one has just been published. So what there is there is quite in the latest KPMG Nunwood report, quite a lot of case studies of how various brands have improved their rankings through customer experience redesign and performance and so on. But I'm not sort of claiming that they would have all done it through customer journey mapping. I mean, they would have. I think most people that I talk to in conferences and so on have done sort of customer journey mapping. But it's I'm struggling a little bit, Arthur, just to say, well, you know, I can give you an example of, you know, of ABC company. Here's their journey map. Here's the benefits they got out of it.
I mean, you said how important it is to get senior level engagement within companies, and what Viv is asking for is some conviction material to help that through. So,
yeah. Can I just make a suggestion? Which just one idea is that these case studies, commercial case studies, are very hard to come by because organisations are secretive about how they've, you know, how they're going to improve their experience. They don't want to give the game away. We found a couple of public sector examples one Alvin showed, which was to do with housing benefit claims. There's another one that we've got that's about looking at people reporting antisocial behaviour and how that journey is managed. So we can provide a couple of slides for a couple of public sector type examples, but commercial examples, for reasons of confidentiality, are pretty impossible to come by, I'm afraid.
No, I appreciate that. So I think if you've got that link or whatever it is, Alvin, to KPMG Nunwood, that would be useful. And if you could send anything else through, then I can make sure that when we publish the recording of the webinar, that those materials are available to people as well. Thank you.
By all means, I mean, the Nunwood research is easy to find. You just in your just Google nunwood.com. You might want to put 3 W's in front of it, but there's probably no need. Nunwood.com and the Excellence Centre, and you can quite quickly register there and download all the latest reports. And I've got no axe to grind for it. It's a really good read, and it tells you how some of the best brands in the UK have improved. I think when Jane and I do the MRS course, we talk about a few brands who've improved, and one of the ones that we talk about very briefly is Premier Inn, who've sort of gone from a sort of fairly tired, low-cost brand into something that people are really impressed with a lot of the time, and they did quite a lot of research to focus on just one bit of their experience, which is the bed. So if you've seen Premier Inn's advertising, they talk about the bed. It's the star of the show, literally and figuratively, and it's a Hypnos bed. They're very expensive, but their research, and they did this through, they researched the experience and they researched the journey, and they figured that the bed was the most important bit. Yet everything else has to be right as well: check-in, shower, hot water, tea and coffee. But the bed is the star of the show, and that was a key part of their journey. It was the hotspot, the moment of truth. So there's a good example for me, I think, that might help Viv, just to sort of think about how does journey mapping work and what do you get. If you do it in a structured way, get your research, talk to your customers, then you can do what Premier Inn have done and transform your business through making the bed the star of the show.
Okay, I've got 6 questions, but because of time, I'd like a very quick response to each, if that's possible. Some of these questions are actually quite complicated. So here's a question from Midge Clayton. Hi, I'm working with a government guidance service where the customer journey is much broader than just the actual interaction they have with the service. Awareness, realization of need, trigger points, becoming aware of the service, contact, non-contact with the service, then the customer journey through their interaction with the service, then actions after using the service, so impacts and outcomes. So what would your top tips be for adapting this approach to that sort of wider journey mapping? Is it simply a question of dividing it up and having a journey map for each part of the process?
What I would do, Midge, is map. You've just yourself identified what the stages are, and I wasn't counting, but sort of 6, 7, 8, 9. I would plot those stages on a map simply. It could be sort of Susan's example, and work out what the key interactions under those different stages are, and then you might need some research to sort of tell yourself, well, which is the most important bits that we need to change first, and then you'll need to do a more detailed map for that stage or those stages. So I would plot all those stages on one map and then go to the next level, which is to then break down the important stages into a sub map and work on those. That would be my approach.
Okay, we've got a question from Alan Bowman, who says, how much involvement have you had with managing the change which CJM can lead to? And I guess this is probably from both consultancy and research perspectives. Are there any simple generic level tips you can share?
Yeah, well, certainly at London Underground, I was involved in the process of implementing customer experience change, and the tips that Alvin gave about ensuring there's a senior sponsor is probably, to me, the most important one, because without that top level drive in a large organisation, it's hard to get things to change. So I think that would be my my top tip.
That's the main tip, yeah, okay.
Mm.
Tessa Weaver has asked a question, do you find identifying the key stages is generally intuitive and successful, I suppose? Is it fairly easy and straightforward to achieve?
It shouldn't be a problem if you know enough about your business, but typically the sort of life cycle end-to-end maps have, it's about 8 stages: awareness, interest, decide, buy, receive, use, problem solving, renew in insurance, and then eventually leave. I mean, those are the sort of typical high-level stages of a life cycle journey, and you can use those in the absence of something that you haven't got already, and then and I think Midge could probably do that as well for his journey. So and then if you need to break it up into sub journeys, then obviously you need a little bit more detail and granularity that you will know from your own business.
I've got a couple of things that have come in from Carol Wrightatar. Hi, Carol. Alvin, maybe the council has mapped the ticketing process and knows one reminder is not likely to work. Sorry for being a cynic. But she then does follow on with a serious question. Are there tools for visualizing quantitative numbers of customer journey maps, i.e. many customers within one segment, sort of same process? So this is a quantitative number.
Yeah, I would say that the heartbeat type map can be used at either the individual person's story type level, Susan in the supermarket, or can just as well be used in aggregated data where the scale is reflecting the statistics that you've collected about the experience from customer satisfaction surveys and the like, as opposed to an individual person's experience. Does that answer the question, do you think?
I think another, that's absolutely right. I think another way of sort of thinking about Carol's question is, and this reminds me of a piece of work I did with a mobile phone retailer, so High Street. What we actually did with their map was effectively show the sales funnel across the different stages. So how many people in the country, in the UK, per year come into their stores potentially to buy a mobile phone? 3 million. How many customers actually sign up with a new contract? 500,000. I made those numbers up, but so they've got obviously a huge potential audience there, and if you can just put those numbers across the top of your map, we did that with the railway as well. How many people sort of think about booking a ticket here, but how many people actually book the ticket here as opposed to go to the train line to buy their ticket? That's quite powerful, because then you can say to the business, well, look, we've got all these people looking at us, but actually only this many are buying from us. There must be something wrong with our journey. So that might help Carol think about her question as well.
Yes, thanks. Very final question, and then we have to close. And it's a very relevant question. This is from Hugh McCormack. Is there any difference in the approach that you might apply to a B2B sector? I think he's working on a project about tenants on a science park. So is there any difference in the approach, or would the same philosophy apply?
I've done B2B as well. I've done it with sort of business telcos and so on. I think the main principles are the same. I think the things that drive success in B2B relationships are a little bit different to sort of B2C, because obviously you're dealing with a smaller number of relationships, but the actual value of those relationships, it can be millions or billions or hundreds of thousands. So I think the hotspots in a B2B map are likely to be quite different from the hotspots in a B2C map, but I think the same principles will apply.
You'll also have a greater number of potential decision makers, so the mapping could be more complex in that you could have a member of staff in your client company who's experienced in the service, but they're not the only decision maker about whether the organisation is going to continue to buy from you. And so there may be different angles from which the journey, the different perspectives that the journey needs to be mapped from. So it's can be a little more complex than with a B2C.
Okay, I did say that was the final question, but there's just been another one come in, and I need to ask it because it's from our sponsor. Eugene Murphy is the boss of Indemo, and his question is, do the speakers have any case studies where the customer documented their own journey, or is it more usually recorded by a researcher accompanying the customer? Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question to finish off. How much of this can be done DIY by the customer, or how much of it needs to be done via observation?
Yeah, well, I think the collection of feedback by customers themselves is a very powerful way to relay customer stories and to emphasize particular examples of where quantitative data is showing that there's a problem. So I think the two often work well hand in hand, and certainly using powerful personal testimony from customers can really get emotional engagement amongst senior decision makers, for sure.